22, and it's good to see all of you here this morning. Glad you're with us, and those of you online, we're glad that you're with us this morning also as we continue our study in the book of Genesis. Today, it's going to be Joseph, master of dreams. Joseph, master of dreams. So that's going to be the study today in the book of Genesis. And before we get started, let's bow our heads for prayer. Father, which art in heaven, we thank you for the opportunity to come together here this morning. We pray now that you will send the Holy Spirit in a special way as we open up the Scriptures and study, that our hearts and minds can be challenged, and that we will be able to receive a blessing this morning from this study. We ask all these things in Jesus' name. Amen. Well, as always, I'd like to share something with you as far as an extra reading goes. And this morning, it's going to come from Sons and Daughters of God. Sons and Daughters of God. Joseph, a Christian gentleman. We are elevated, ennobled, refined, but the Lord was with Joseph and showed him mercy and gave him favor in the sight of the keeper of the prison. That's Genesis 39:21, and you'll recognize that from our study today because we were in the book of Genesis studying this morning in chapters 38 and 39. Joseph regarded his being sold into Egypt as the greatest calamity that could have befallen him. But he saw the necessity of trusting in God as he had never done when protected by his father's love. Joseph brought God with him into Egypt, and the fact was made apparent by his cheerful demeanor amid his sorrow. And as the ark of God brought rest and prosperity to Israel, so did this God-loving and God-fearing youth bring a blessing to Egypt. This was manifested in so marked a manner that Potiphar, in whose house he served, attributed all of his blessings to his purchased slave. Think about that. He attributed all of his blessings to his purchased slave. Joseph's religion kept his temper sweet and his sympathy with humanity warm and strong, notwithstanding all his trials. There are those who, if they feel they are not rightly used, become sour, ungenerous, crabbed, and uncourteous in their words and deportment. They sink down discouraged, hateful, and hating others. But Joseph was a Christian. No sooner does he enter upon prison life than he brings all the brightness of his Christian principles into active exercise. He begins to make himself useful to others. He enters into the troubles of his fellow prisoners. He is cheerful, for he is a Christian gentleman. God was preparing him under this discipline for a situation of great responsibility, honor, and usefulness. And he was willing to learn. He took kindly to the lessons that the Lord would teach him. And he learned to bear the yoke in his youth. He learned to govern by first learning obedience himself. The part which Joseph acted in connection with the scenes of the gloomy prison was that which raised him finally to prosperity and honor. God designed that he should obtain an experience by temptations, adversity, and hardships to prepare him to fill an exalted position. Joseph carried his religion everywhere, and this was the secret of his unwavering fidelity. He carried his religion everywhere that he went. And you think about that in our lives today. Think about that in relationship to yourself and myself. Do I and do we carry our religion wherever we go? Do we carry that unwavering religion with us as we meet people and as we talk to people? Or do we change from one situation to another, whatever we may be involved with, and a group that we may be around? Joseph, the master of dreams. Look at the text today there on page 88. Then they said to one another, "Look, this dreamer is coming." This dreamer is coming. Who said this? His brothers did. Now, at this point in the family, these brothers that, as I've mentioned to you before, that come from how many different mothers? 4. Come from 4 different mothers. And of course, there will be 12 brothers when it's all over with. And Joseph and Benjamin, of course, they came from who? Who was their mother? Rachel. Rachel was their mother. And the one that Jacob really loved, right? Loved her the most. You know, we learned that last week in studying, or the week before. You've got a family here. You want to call it dysfunctional? 4 different mothers, same daddy, but 4 different mothers. That in itself can get some things going. And it doesn't stop there, because, as we've studied before, Jacob had a favorite. He had a favorite, and his favorite was? Joseph was his favorite. Make no bones about it, it was evident that he had a favorite. It was evident to the other brothers that he had a favorite. And there was no holding it back. And when you look at this, and as we study today, you know, the story of Joseph is probably one that's right up there as the most popular stories in the Bible. You know, they teach us that downstairs very early on about Joseph and Daniel and Jesus. That's one of the things to think about today, the similarities between those 3. Similarities between Joseph, Daniel, and Jesus. And think about that a little bit. I'll come back to that later. But when you look at Joseph, his birth order out of 12 is what number? 11. He's the 11th. He's the 11th out of 12. Now, I'm not going to ask for a show of hands, but maybe some of you here today have come from large families. And in that large family, maybe you were number 1, or maybe you were the baby. A lot changes, you know, as parents over time in relationship to large families. And there was no exception in this family. This family had its problems. I already told you, and you told me, that there were 4 different mothers for these children. And that in itself creates some problems. Well, let's take a look here. He's the master of dreams, referred to as the dreamer. And let's go right to it here on page 89. Family troubles. And let's take a look at this morning. Let's turn to Genesis 37. And Brent, if you would start out and read Genesis 37, 1, 2, 3. Nikki, 4, 5, 6. Ron Whitlow, 7, 8, 9. And Karen, finish up with 10 and 11, please. Genesis 37. Open up your Bibles, and if you're at home, open yours up too, so we can see what it says. What family dynamic predisposed Joseph's brothers to hate him so much in this situation? All right, Brent, go ahead, please. 1, 2, 3.
Now Jacob lived in the land where his father had sojourned, in the land of Canaan. These are the records of the generations of Jacob. Joseph, when 17 years of age, was pasturing the flocks with his brothers while he was still a youth, along with the sons of Bela, the sons of Zilpah, his father's wives, and Joseph brought back a bad report about them to their father. Now Israel loved Joseph more than all his sons, because he was the son of his old age, and he made a varied color tunic.
Okay, let's talk about a lot of things here in those 3 verses. A lot packed in there. And it says, how old was he at this time? 17, so we know that he's a teenager. 17 years old. It goes on to say who he was out there in the fields with. It says he was out there in the fields with the sons of Bela and the sons of Zilpah. That's who he's out there with. And he comes back home. Now, those of you that have brothers and sisters, you know what this is like when somebody tattles on you. And so he tattled on them. Comes back with a bad report. Hey, Daddy, this is going on out there, and they're doing this and they're doing that. Now, it goes on to say, in relationship to favoritism, it says that he went ahead and he made him a tunic, a coat of many colors. Doesn't say he made a coat of colors for the other boys, does it? It says he made a coat of many colors for him. He was listening to his father's instructions all this time as he was being raised. These other boys, that's a different story. But he was listening, he was obedient. And those of you that are parents here, you know what that means in raising up your children. When you have a child who will listen to you and be obedient and do what you ask, you have to guard against that favoritism showing, because this favoritism, there was no guard against it. It was out front, in the center, in the middle, in your face. He was the favorite of Dad. No doubt about it whatsoever. Nikki, the next verses, please. 4, 5, and 6.
But when his brothers saw that their father loved him more than all his brothers, they hated him and could not speak peaceably to him. Now Joseph had a dream, and he told it to his brothers, and they hated him even more. So he said to them, "Please hear this dream which I have dreamed."
Oh my. The guy already has this coat. He's been singled out as the favorite. And it doesn't stop there. He goes ahead and says, I got a dream. I've got a dream, and I want to share this dream with you. Oh, yeah, right. They already hated him. You notice they used the word hate. Hated him. And, I'm not going to ask anybody to talk about their families this morning, but, within your family, has there ever been a time when brothers and sisters hate each other? And, if you were in the middle of that, you know what I'm talking about? Hate. Hate's a strong word. Even though it's only 4 letters, it is a strong word to hate someone. Strong. Understand, these brothers hated him. And what had he done? Well, when you look at it, he really hadn't done a whole lot. But they hated him. They hated him. Hated to see him coming. Hated the sight of him. Hated the fact that he was even around. Didn't want any part of it. And he wants them to listen to his dream. Ron, pick it up from there, please. 7, 8, and 9.
We were out in the field tying up bundles of grain. Suddenly my bundle stood up, and your bundles all gathered around and bowed before me." His brothers responded, "So you think you will be our king, do you? Do you actually think you will reign over us?" And they hated him all the more because of his dreams and the way he talked about them. Soon Joseph had another dream, and again he told his brothers about it. "Listen, I have had another dream," he said. "The sun, moon, and stars even bowed before me."
The sun, the moon, and the 11 stars bowed down to me. Oh, man. We already know, we've read that they hate him. And now it's not going to stop there. These 11 stars, the brothers, are going to bow down to him. Oh, boy. You talk about a situation now where it's going from bad to worse. Dennis?
Just one before we get too far ahead here, Jesse. The old saying is, you reap what you sow.
Uh-huh.
And if you should go back, it wasn't that much that we studied about Jacob and the hate between him and Esau. Well, would you say that Jacob had sowed a little bit here with his children? And I think he's paying still for what happened years before.
Yeah, absolutely. Very good point. That's true. Because there had been hate between Jacob and his twin brother Esau when we studied that a few weeks ago. Well, here we are now. Verse 9 finished up. The 11 stars bowed down to me. All right, Karen, finish it up, please. 10, 11, and 12.
So he told it to his father and his brothers, and his father rebuked him and said to him, "What is this dream that you have dreamed? Shall your mother and I and your brothers indeed come to bow down to the earth before you?" And his brothers envied him, but his father kept the matter in his mind.
Kept the matter in his mind. So, Jacob, at this point, he's not throwing it out, is he, from what it's telling us here in the scriptures? He's not throwing it out. And what you have now is you have favoritism, you have envy from the brothers. Well, they'd like a nice coat too, I'm sure. They're out there working hard in the fields and doing these things, taking care of the sheep. You have a dream in which the sheaves bow down. Now, understand something in this economy that we're talking about. In this economy, sheaves, being wheat or barley, are very important because this is the lifeblood of their economy. This is it. If this wheat crop doesn't make it, they're in trouble. They're in trouble because, of their being self-sustaining. So it's very, very important to this economy and to their well-being that the wheat makes it. Now, I share that because notice what it says in the verses that these sheaves bowed down. And so when you look at this, and he's telling his dad, he's telling his brothers this dream, and the fires are just kindling more and more and more. And again, I ask you to think back in your own lives. If there's been this kind of tension in your family, and this kind of tension just kind of keeps going on and on. It gets greater as the days go by or whatever the situation was. So, keep that in mind, if that has happened to you in your family and where this is going here in this particular family. And at the bottom of the page, it says Matthew 20, verses 26 and 27. And Kim, if you'd read that for us, please. Matthew 20, verses 26 and 27. And the question here is what crucial principle is revealed here. And how can we learn to manifest in our own lives what it teaches? Go ahead, please.
Okay. Yet it shall not be so among you, but whoever desires to become great among you, let him be your servant, and whoever desires to be first among you, let him be your slave.
Does that sound like a lot of fun? No. He who desires to be first, let him be your slave. Think about that in relationship to where I've been going with this as far as your own individual family, and thinking back, hopefully it's years and years ago. Hope it's not current. And how things were playing out in your situation, and how they're playing out in this situation. Because it's going to get worse. On the next page, page 90. On page 90, Genesis 37, 12 through 36. This is such an important story. Normally, I would say, well, I hope you've read it and move on. But we're going to read this taking 3 and 4 verses at a time, because it's so important what unfolds here in this story. And Dennis, if you will start us out, please. And I would like for you to read verses 12, 13, and 14. And then Sue, 15, 16, and 17. And then Phil, 18, 19, and 20. And Kathy, 21, 22, and 23. And Lawrence, 24, 25, and 26. Madonna, 27, 28, and 29. And Juan, verses 30, 31, and 32. And then Melissa, finish it up for me, 33 to 36. So, Dennis, you're going to start out. You're at verses 12 and 13 and 14, please.
Okay. Then his brothers went to feed their father's flock in Shechem. And Israel said to Joseph, Are not your brothers feeding the flock in Shechem? Come, I will send you to them. So he said to him, Here am I. Then he said to him, Please go and see if it is well with your brothers and well with the flocks, and bring me back word to me. So he sent him out to the valley of Hebron, and he went to Shechem.
Now, thank you. Now, where have you seen this place before? Shechem. Where have you seen this? What happened at Shechem? They wiped out all the males of Shechem. Remember that story? That was last week or week before. You know, they wanted to marry the women of the Israelites. They wanted to take them in marriage, and you take our girls and all this. And, of course, said, yeah, you got to be circumcised. They got circumcised. And then there were 2 of the sons who took it upon themselves. Remember the names of those 2 that took it upon themselves to murder? Simeon and Levi. Okay? Simeon and Levi went in and took care of it. So that's where he's telling him to go, because that's where they're supposed to be taking care of the flocks. They're over there. And notice Joseph's response. He didn't say, oh, no, I got to stay home. I don't feel so good. Don't want to go down there. No, he said, here am I. That's how he responds to his dad. Here am I. And he's going to go. All right. Sue, 15, 16, and 17, please.
But the area was so large that he couldn't find his brothers. A man noticed him wandering the fields as if he were looking for someone, so he stopped him and said, What are you looking for? Maybe I can help you. Joseph said, I'm looking for my brothers who are taking care of our herds somewhere near here. Have you seen them? And if you have, can you tell me where they are? The man said, Yes, they left here a few days ago, and I heard them say they were taking the herds to pastures near Dothan. Joseph thanked the man and went on to Dothan, which was about another day's journey. Finally, he found them.
So, can't find them there. Not where Dad said they were going to be. finds this man. You ever think about that? This man? What would have happened if in...
Out there in the middle of the desert.
Yeah, he finds this man. And, like she said, in the middle of nowhere. And this man tells them where they went. Did you ever think about it? If he never found the man, what would have happened? But that's not the case. The case?
The man found him.
Found him. Thank you. Yeah, the man found him. So he wasn't looking for the man. He found him. So he gets directions. Now he's got to go another day's journey down the road or whatever it was there to get to him. Okay, now we're ready for some more verses. We're over here on 18, 19, and 20. And Phil, I believe that's you.
Let me read a little bit of 17 there. It says, Joseph thanked him, the man, and went on to Dothan about another day's journey. Finally, he spotted them. When they saw him in the distance, they said, "Hey, look who's coming, the dreamer." And they agreed to kill him as soon as he came into camp. They sneered, "That dreamer is coming to spy on us. Then he'll go and tell Father how bad we've been." I wondered how bad they'd been. They were tending the flocks, and they were moving them around the pasture to pasture them, so they were doing okay. But I wondered.
They must have been up to something.
Must have been up to something. So let's kill him and throw his body into a dried up well, and we'll say that a wild animal killed him. Then we'll see what happens to his dreams.
Oh my. Let's unpack these 3 verses. They see him coming. Now keep in mind about the scenario I've set up with your family. They see him coming. Now, they've disliked him, but now we've stepped it up some more. We want to kill him. We want to kill our brother. We've had enough of him. We want to kill him. And when you look at that, it goes on to say they want to kill him now, don't they? Not going to wait. We want to kill him now and throw him into a pit, his body, and let the animals eat him up. So there's where we are in this scenario. I hope that your scenario never got that far down the path where you wanted to kill your brother or your sister. I hope. But that's where they want to kill him now. Okay, next up. Kathy, please. 21, 22, and 23.
But Reuben overheard their plans and decided to save Joseph. He said, "Let's not kill him. After all, he's our brother." Then he suggested, instead of killing him and becoming murderers, let's just throw him alive into one of these empty wells and let him die. There are a number of them right here. He made this suggestion because he intended to rescue Joseph and send him back to his father before anything else happened to him. Joseph neared the camp. They waved at him, but when he got there, instead of hugging him, they grabbed him, ripped off his robe, dragged him over to the nearby well, and dropped him into it.
Now, you think about that. Waved, and instead of any kind of conversation, it's, hey, take off the coat, of many colors, get it off, and throw him into the pit. Now, notice the name here. Does this name sound familiar? Have we heard about this fellow before? Where did we hear about Reuben? And what I'm particularly asking, what did he do that wasn't too nice? slept with his father's concubine. Well, the story, the plot gets thicker. This is an R-rated movie, is what this is. It's getting thicker. And he's the one. He didn't tell them, you know, his whole idea here, you notice what it says, don't want to shed no blood, let's just cast him into the pit. So he's slowed it down, is what he's doing here. You know, the scriptures is telling us that. Lawrence, pick it up, please. The next 3 verses.
You know, Jesse, I don't think his brothers just then decided they wanted to kill him. You know, usually what happens is we think about things. I think they had murder in their heart for a long time.
Right.
What happens is as we go through life, all of a sudden an opportunity presents itself. This was their opportunity to do what they'd been thinking about for a long time.
Yep.
Maybe Reuben had thought about it and softened somewhat, but the others didn't.
No.
Once they got away from their dad, now they had an opportunity.
They've got it. You got it. Very good.
And they sat down to eat bread, and they lifted up their eyes and looked, and behold, a company of Ishmaelites came from Gilead with their camels, bearing spicery and balm and myrrh, going to carry it down to Egypt. And Judah said unto his brethren, what profit is it if we slay our brother and conceal his blood? 27, was I supposed to read that too?
Well, 24 is where you read that one.
24, 25, and 26?
Yes,
And Judah said unto his brethren, what profit is if we slay our brother? So they were thinking about how they could benefit themselves.
Make a little money here. Mm-hmm. Hey, by the way, who are these Ishmaelites? They're cousins. Hey. Yeah, they're their cousins. They're coming across, you know. And think about this one. You know, we talked about the man a while ago who went looking, as Lawrence pointed out, looking for him. Well, think about these cousins. I mean, they're sitting there eating. They got the water. By the way, they threw him in a waterless pit, you know. So he had no water. He had no food. I don't know how long he's been down there. Doesn't tell us. But they look up and they see this caravan across the plains coming. Man, what a lucky day for them. And going to make some money off of this deal before it's over with. And like we said, they are their cousins that are coming. Okay, Madonna, you're up, please. 27, 28, and 29, please.
Come and let us sell him to the Ishmaelites, and let not your hand be upon him, for he is our brother and our flesh. And his brothers listened. Then Midianite traders passed by. So the brothers pulled Joseph up and lifted him out of the pit and sold him to the Ishmaelites for 20 shekels of silver, and they took Joseph to Egypt. Then Reuben returned to the pit, and indeed Joseph was not in the pit, and he tore his clothes.
He tore his clothes. He's upset because his plan, as we already read, his plan was he was going to release him, send him back to Dad, get him out of here. That was his plan. All right, 1, 30, 31, and 32.
Yeah, before I read, I will give some credit to Reuben, because I think one of the things that creates this animosity in his brother is because the treatment that he's getting is like the treatment of the firstborn, like all the privilege of being the first. And Reuben is the first, and Reuben is trying to save him. So I will give him some credit.
Okay.
Right. And he returned to his brother and said, the lad is no more. And where should I go? So he took Joseph's tunic, killed a kid of the goat, and dipped the tunic in the blood. And they sent the tunic of many colors, and they brought it to their fathers and said, we have found this, do you know whether it is your son tunic or not?
Oh, boy. Keep in mind now, I've told you earlier about similarities between Joseph, Daniel, and Jesus. Okay? I see a similarity here. They sold him for what? 20 shekels of silver. Okay? Sound familiar there with Jesus? The amount's different, but yeah. but it's the idea is the same. And so now they have taken this goat, killed it, taken the blood, dipped his tunic in the blood, and now they're going to go back home. And Melissa, go ahead and finish it up, 33 to 36.
And he recognized it and said, "It is my son's tunic. A wild beast has devoured him. Without doubt, Joseph is torn to pieces." Then Jacob tore his clothes, put sackcloth on his waist, and mourned for his son many days. And all his sons and all his daughters arose to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted. And he said, "For I shall go down into the grave to my son in mourning." Thus his father wept for him. Now the Midianites had sold him in Egypt to Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh and captain of the guard.
So, they come back and they lie. And you remember what Jacob's name meant. Deceiver. We learned that a few weeks ago. So now they're lying to Dad, and he is beside himself. He has not just lost a son, he has lost his favorite son. He has lost his favorite son. And you may say, well, but he's got all these other sons and these daughters. Notice what the scripture said. They couldn't comfort him. He didn't want that. He's lost his favorite boy. And Joseph, can you imagine? Your brothers have already done this to you. And they've thrown you in a pit. You've come out of the pit. You've been sold to the Ishmaelites. And you're in this prison at this point, prison on this caravan. And then you get to Egypt. Now understand something about Egypt. When you're talking about history, at this time in history of the world, where was Egypt in the history of the world at this time? It's the top. That is the country of the world. It's the number one nation of the world at this point in history. And this is very important to keep in mind. Don't forget that. There was no other country greater than Egypt at this point in history. And he is now sold, get this, he's not free to walk and do whatever he wants to do. He is a slave. And he is now sold to Potiphar, who's a captain of the guard for the highest person in Egypt, which is the Pharaoh. That's who he's sold to, Potiphar. Well, notice here on Tuesday, we take a little deviation because we got Joseph down in prison, at Potiphar's house. And now it interjects a story here on page 91. Again, this one's rated R. In Genesis 38, it says, compare Judah's behavior with that of the Canaanite Tamar. Who of the two is more righteous and why? Who of the two is more righteous and why? Boy, this is a story in chapter 38. And it tells you here, reading between the lines, Judah is not real happy what has happened with Joseph. And it tells us that he decides to get away from his brothers. And so he takes a trip. And notice it says he visited a certain woman, and it tells you her name there, Hira. And he saw there a daughter of a certain Canaanite whose name was Shua, and he married her, and he went into her and conceived and bore, and it goes on. And he has these boys. He has 3 boys. And you know, the tradition of that period in history was if there was not a son born and the dad or the husband died, then the next thing that was to happen was the next son was supposed to move up and preserve the seed. And it goes on, the first boy dies, the second boy, same situation happens, and so the third boy, the third one in line that was supposed to take the place, he wasn't old enough yet at this point. And Judah decides to do what in the end here with that third boy? Send him away. Yeah, he didn't want that to happen here. Brent?
You know, you asked that question to begin with, who's following God's will, or what's going on here, who's more righteous than the other, however you want to phrase that. And to kind of preface that story or wash the whole story through, what you see is you know, here's one of the sons of Israel, here's Judah, and he's looking at the way things are playing out, and he knows what God's will is and the customs that God has set up for the family, but he begins to think, well, I don't like the way this is playing out, I'm going to alter this a little bit. But you see Tamar, who has very little dialogue in this whole story, almost none. But what we see is someone who's very much dominated by the culture, and yet she's going to claim God's promise. God has promised me a future through my family if I follow his will. And she is claiming that promise, really what's going on here, whereas Judah's turning away from it.
Yeah, he is. He is. The story gets better. She determines, as it tells us in the scriptures, to go down to a certain place that's mentioned here. And there is a little bit of negotiation going on here in verse 15. He saw her. He thought she was a harlot because she had covered her face. Doesn't, face is covered. He doesn't know who she is. So then he turned to her by the way and said, "Please let me come in to you," for he did not know that she was his daughter-in-law. So she said, "Well, what will you give me that you may come into me?" And he said, "I will send a young goat from the flock." So she said, "Will you give me a pledge till you send it?" And then he says, "Well, what pledge shall I give you?" So she said, "Your signet and cord and your staff that is in your hand." Then he gave them to her, and he went into her, and she conceived by him. By the way, just to clarify something, his wife, not to make it right, but his wife had already passed away at this point. And so the negotiations went well. It was all decided what would happen. And she got up early in the morning and went away, laid her veil and put on the garments of her widowhood, and out she went. She was the widow from the number 2 son at this point. And so Judah sent the young goat by the hand of his friend and to receive his pledge from the woman's hand, but he did not find her. He asked the men of the place. He asked the men. It says, here again, we're talking about asking somebody. We already talked about earlier, Joseph asked a man. Now we're talking about this guy asking the men. Well, where is this? We don't know any harlot. We don't know any harlot. And so he returned to Judah and said, I cannot find her. Also, the men of the place said there was no harlot in this place. Then Judah said, let her take them for herself, lest we be shamed, for I sent this young goat, and you have not found her. And it came to pass, got that, verse 24, came to pass about 3 months after that Judah was told, saying, Tamar, your daughter-in-law has played the harlot. Furthermore, she is with child by harlotry. So Judah said, what are we going to do with her? Yeah, we're going to burn her up, kill her. And so she sent to her father-in-law, saying, by the man to whom these being, I am with child. Uh-oh. Please determine whose these are, the signet, the cord, and the staff. Pretty smart lady. Pretty smart lady. And so it was when she was giving birth that the one put out his hand, and the midwife took a scarlet thread, bound it on his hand, saying, this one came out first. Then it happened as he drew back his hand that his brother came out unexpectedly, and she said, how do you break through? How did you break through? This breach be upon you. Therefore his name was called Perez, and afterward his brother came out, who had the scarlet thread on his hand, and his name was called Zerah. I can't explain this story. All I can do is share it with you. It comes from the Bible. By the way, you know, this is the line that Jesus came from. This is the line that Jesus came from. And this story, you know, as you read it, as you study it, she had a lot of faith in relationship to what she was doing. And as Brent mentioned, Judah had figured out some things and kind of taken things against tradition and sent his third boy away so that he would not be the one with this lady. And so, all right, Peter.
Yeah, I was just going to say, you know, unlike Isaac and Jacob and Abraham, Judah chooses a wife from Canaan. I think that was the beginning of some of his troubles. And then the sons, when we read about the sons in here, if you read about them, the first two, in the eyes of the Lord, they were wicked. They did wickedness, and that's why they were killed. That's what it says. Now, it wasn't because of Tamar, it was because of their own actions, but Judah didn't understand that. And so, you know, we get this picture of God working through our bad choices, but still working through those choices and coming through.
Coming through it. Right. Right. Page 92. Page 92. Joseph, a slave in Egypt. Genesis 39. It says, in light of the example of Joseph's working as a manager under Potiphar, what are the factors that led to such a success? What are the factors that led to such a success? When you think about this, Joseph was a blessed person. You know, I'm sure in your life, I know it is in my life, there are certain hardships, there are certain temptations that we go through. And we look at those hardships at the time we're going through them and we say, why in the world did this ever happen to me? And I've shared this with you, and I'm not going to go into a lot of details, but when I lost a business, I thought I was finished. I went into a state of mourning. I went into a state of no self-worth because I thought that was success in having a business and being successful at it. And little did I realize or understand that that was a breaking point for me in my life, because at that point, when I lost everything, I had no place to go but to the Lord. Now, I'm not saying that I had no relationship with Jesus before then, but it was marginal or conditional, I guess is the best way to put it. But when I lost everything, the only person I could turn to outside of family was Jesus Christ. I mean, I had no idea how I was going to make it. None. And when I think about Joseph here, he's down in a foreign land. I don't know if we ever think about this, but he probably didn't even know the language. And he's in a foreign land trying to make it. He's a slave. He's been sold. He's at Potiphar's house. But the things that he had learned as a boy and been taught was to do a good job wherever you are and whoever you're working for. That's so important in relationship to things, to be taught to do a good job, no matter what it is, and whatever age you are. I mean, you can teach children. They don't have to be teenagers or in high school to be taught how to work. And when they're taught how to work and to do those jobs very precisely and diligently, that carries through with them, because that's what it did in this young man's case. It carried with him. He's a slave. What are you going to do about it? You going to run away? No. He's stuck. He's a slave. So he takes it upon himself, as you see this, to do the very best that he could for Potiphar. And Potiphar, as we read earlier, he gives him all the credit for his success of his household. He doesn't say, oh, yeah, he's a good guy. He doesn't give me any trouble. No, he gives him the credit for the success of his household. Well, when you look at this, Genesis 39, verses 7 through 12, it says, how did Joseph resist the advances of Potiphar's wife? Peter, if you would read that for us, Genesis 39, 7 through 12. And it says, why did Joseph specifically say that to do what she asked would be a sin against God? And what understanding does he show of the nature of sin and what it is? Go ahead, please.
And it came to pass after these things that his master's wife cast longing eyes on Joseph. And she said, lie with me. But he refused and said to his master's wife, look, my master does not know what is with me in his house, and he has committed to me all that he has in my hand. There is no one greater in this house than I, nor has he kept back anything from me but you, because you are his wife. How then can I do this great wickedness and sin against God?
Go ahead, the rest of it too, please. 10, 11, and 12.
Sorry about that. So it was as she spoke to Joseph day by day that he did not heed her to lie with her or to be with her. But it happened about this time when Joseph went up into the house to do the work, and none of the men of the house was inside, that she caught him by his garment, saying, lie with me. But he left his garment in her hand, and he fled, and he ran outside.
Can you imagine the picture of that? He took off. He took off and he ran as fast as he could run to get out of there. He'd been telling this lady, and I don't know, the scriptures don't tell us how long this was going on. I don't know if it's days, months, years. I don't know. But she was persistent. It tells me that in the scriptures. She's persistent. She's not backing off. And she's so persistent that, okay, here's what's going to happen. He's up there by himself. There's no other men around. So she grabs his garment. Think about that. Grabs hold of his shirt or whatever, the tunic, whatever it was there. And he runs so fast that that thing comes right off of him. Comes right off of him because he wants out of there. Well, you know how the story goes on. The story goes on that she puts the word out. He's raped me. He's violated me. Brent?
Boy, here's a great example for us. I can say for myself, I think it's for everyone. When trouble comes our way, do sometimes we stop and look it over? Do sometimes we kind of think about it and think, well, begin to rationalize. Maybe this, maybe that, or maybe I ought to look this over. Let me think about it. He didn't think at all. He's already made up his mind. And, he constantly denies, I'm not going to be involved in this. He constantly keeps his honor. I'm not going to be involved in this. It's wrong. And then when he's finally pressed, he's not thinking it over. Well, maybe I ought to go along. He runs. When trouble comes his way, he runs. I got to go the other way. What an example for everyone.
It is. Very good point. Very good point. Well, Potiphar comes home. The story is that this is what Joseph has done to her. And it says here, as you continue reading, your servant did to me after this manner, that his anger was aroused. And Joseph's master took him, put him into prison, where the king's prisoners were confined, and he was there in prison. So, there was no debate, there was no discussion, as far as we know from the scriptures. Off to prison he goes. Now, think about this in relationship to Daniel and Jesus. Daniel was accused of some things. And where did he go? He went to the lion's den. Yeah. Jesus was accused of things, and where did Jesus go? He went to the cross. Yeah, prison. So, here's Joseph down in prison now. Now the dreamer is still around, because he has a gift of interpreting dreams. And as you look at Thursday's lesson on page 93, it unfolds here in Genesis chapter 40, and on into 41. It unfolds in relationship to, he meets these two guys in prison. What are the two people he meets? A butler and a baker. He meets these guys because the Pharaoh, the king, has thrown him into prison. And so they're in prison. And he starts talking to them. And they've got this dream. And so he tells them the interpretation of the dream for both of them. One of them, it's a pretty good interpretation. The butler says, you're going to be reinstated and, you're going to be back in good graces with the king. The other one was the baker, and his wasn't so good. He says, in 3 days, you're going to be hanged. You're going to be executed. And so he told the butler, he says, don't forget me. Remember me. Because this is all going to come out true. And it did. The butler was exonerated, went back to the palace. The baker, he was hung. Well, the butler is back in good graces now in the palace. So does the butler say, hey, Pharaoh, there's a guy down in prison and this is what he did for me? No, didn't work out that way. There was how long? 2 years. 2 years. Now, think about this. Would you get discouraged? I'm still down here. I did this guy a favor. It all came out the way I said it would. Well, not the case. 2 years later, the Pharaoh's got dreams. The Pharaoh has some dreams. The dreams being about cows and grain, and I'm paraphrasing now. It's all there in the Bible. You can read about it. And when it was over with, he shared this, and nobody can tell him what it meant. Have we heard that before? What about Daniel? And can't tell him what it meant, but he says, hey, I do remember this guy. 2 years ago, he's sitting down in prison, and he might be able to help you. He says, okay. So he comes up. Joseph tells him the meaning of the dreams, and I'll let Lawrence share with us, and then I'll finish up the story.
Brent was talking about Joseph's character of making his mind up and knowing what he was going to do.
Mm-hmm.
One of the lessons for me out of Joseph that I try to relate myself to is Joseph wasn't a complainer.
No.
Is there anything written in the Bible that says when his brothers mistreated him, when he became a slave, now you're reiterating he was in prison for 2? Does it say anything in the Bible about Joseph complaining and going to God and saying, how could you let this all happen to me? Is there a lesson for us in that, Jesse?
Oh, absolutely. And you can go on with that, Lawrence, and talk about Daniel and Jesus in the same context. Daniel didn't complain. I mean, he got picked up and traveled hundreds of miles from his home. He didn't ask to go up there to Babylon. Jesus, he didn't complain. I mean, they're beating him to death with all those things there. And he didn't complain about that. No. Peter?
I know you're winding down, but I just want to make one little plug for Adventist education.
Okay. All right.
So Joseph and Daniel did not go to an Ivy League school.
Nope.
And Joseph probably went to a little homeschool. And Daniel's school that he went to, there were things when he got to Babylon that he had no idea of. One was the concept of zero. That was new. That was in Babylon. That wasn't in the Jewish education system. And yet both of these guys rise to the top. And they rise to the top through adversity, through everything that could be thrown at them. And they are second to none. Like, nobody in all of Egypt could hold a candle to Joseph. Nobody in all of Babylon could hold a candle to Daniel. And the reason was that character is more important than your GPA, is more important than the school you go to, it's more important than IQ, is character.
Yeah. It's very true. And that's the only thing we're taking with us when we leave this earth, is our character. There's nothing else that we're taking with us. It's only our character. Well, Pharaoh shares these dreams. Joseph tells him the meaning of the dreams. There's going to be 7 years of plenty. And then there's going to be 7 years of drought. Now, you think about that in relationship to he is appearing before the most powerful man in the world at this time. Pharaoh, Egypt is the most powerful country in the world. He's appearing before him, and he's sharing this with him at this point in history. Now, if you're the most powerful man in the world, and you think about Daniel and Nebuchadnezzar, you know that story. We've studied that before. And the most powerful man in the world has just heard this slave, this Hebrew slave, tell me the meaning of this dream. And when you think about it, his reaction could have been, get him out of here. He doesn't know what he's talking about. But the Holy Spirit and the Lord is working upon Pharaoh's heart. It's working upon his heart as it worked upon Nebuchadnezzar's heart. You see, you look at these people in history like Nebuchadnezzar and Pharaoh, and you think, well, man, how in the world does God really love those people? But God loves everyone. Everyone, no matter who they are. We established that a long time ago in our studies. And the thing here is this. He makes him Think about this. He makes him the number 2 man in Egypt. This kid, he's not a kid by now, in his 20s. This young man has come from being sold by his brothers, being accused of raping a woman, being thrown into prison, and by being thrown into prison, you would think that would be the end of the story, but it's not the end of the story yet, because we're going to continue our study next week. Well, no, it'll be the week after, because we won't be here next week. And those of you viewing online, we have a camp meeting service next week, so therefore we will not be meeting as a group. But do your studying on your own where you are, because you're going to see some things happen for Joseph that are just beyond belief. But keep studying. By the